So hello and welcome to our first department seminar of the current spring semester. Today we are hosting Özge İzdeş from Istanbul University Cerrahpaşa division after the split. Özge studied her undergrad and master's degrees in economics at Istanbul University, and then finished her PhD, received her PhD degree from the University of Utah. She worked with Nilüfer Çağatay, Professor Nilüfer Çağatay, actually, who we sadly lost only a few months ago. And Özge mostly and more recently is working on the macroeconomic topics related to gender issues, such as the aging population care, the unequal distribution of income among males and females. And topics related to economic development. And today she's going to present us one of her recent researches with Emel Memiş with the title Aging Population Care and its Employment Effects. So let me leave the camera, the computer to Özge.
Thank you, Anıl. It's a pleasure to take part in your seminar series, and this is an opportunity for me to meet the faculty and graduate level students of Yaşar University, some of whom I know closely from our graduate studies. And I'm just happy to meet the rest today. And Emel Memiş and I have been studying on how elderly care provisioning actually impacts the informal caregivers' participation in the labor market in the past years. We know that the labor force participation of women in Turkey is very low and is not really giving us a promising trend as well. And a huge obstacle, maybe the most important obstacle in women's labor participation is the care responsibility, the unpaid care work that is unequally distributed between men and women in the households. And of course, we are saying this, but we have to also add to this that we don't have a state policy that is actually also taking over some of the care responsibility and reducing this burden to enable both genders to participate in the labor market. So when it comes to who will stay at home and who will go and work in the market, we have an unequal distribution, gender distribution in terms of paid and unpaid work division. Childcare, provision of childcare and how that impacts women's labor force participation is the first reason that comes to mind when we talk about how caregiving affects women's labor force participation. However, we are living in an aging society and the demographics are changing. And so as we are living longer lives, this doesn't necessarily mean that we are living long and healthy lives. Nearly a 20-year length period in average is a time span when while an elderly is living with many diseases and needs to be taken care of. So this is a growing care need that is really neglected by the policymakers, and it is totally left to the households' responsibility. And who takes care of that responsibility is women. And so we see the gendered implications of this. So this was the motivation of our study. We thought that this is a topic that is less explored, even compared to childcare provisioning. So we decided to analyze how provisioning elderly care impacts labor force participation of women. So after explaining the motivation of the study, let me start with presenting our perspective. I'm sure especially Özden and Anıl are familiar with this pyramid that was used a lot actually by our professor in our graduate study, by Nilüfer Çağatay. I wanted to put a touch from Nilüfer in my presentation, because she was the one actually who taught us to see the economics from a holistic perspective. She said that to make economics more inclusive and human-oriented, as well as, with the objective of increasing well-being of human species and sustainability of our lives and well-being, we have to look at the field from a holistic perspective and see the connectedness of its non-monetized spheres with its monetized spheres. So the conventional economics is looking at this monetized sphere, looking at the production and finance sections of the system. However, we also have the reproduction and nature. And when we think about how things have evolved over time, also in an anthropological sense, the first producer of everything has been the nature, even if we think in the historical context. And then on the nature, we learned to, we were trying to sustain our species. We were doing our reproductive activities. Reproduction has been occurring on the nature. And then we started to control the nature, and we came to a point that we actually started to destroy the nature, that we forgot that we are also a part of it now. But also reproduction has emerged on top of nature. Then when we also think about how things have evolved along the history, we will remember that after managing substances economy, we started to produce in extensive amounts, and we started to produce for the market. And then emerged the production sphere of the economy. And after accumulating capital, thanks to in the production sector, then emerged the financial sector. We have to remember that each sphere in this pyramid is actually related with the others, and each one is operating in its own time span. And hence, when we do not let the other spheres function in the way that they require, if we don't provide them the time and the resources to reproduce themselves, then we start facing crisis. For instance, if we are producing, if the production sector functions in a way that doesn't leave any time for us to reproduce ourselves, if you worked for 2 long hours a day, for instance, there's no time left for reproduction. This is resulting with a care crisis, for instance. we don't have the time to care for ourselves. We don't have the time to care for our children, for our elderly, for the sick, disabled, and the rest of people that is in the society. Also, when we are producing and consuming in extensive amounts, we are also not letting actually the nature to reproduce itself. So we are leading to an ecological crisis, which is also a burning topic of today as well. So as feminist economists, actually what we are trying to do is we are trying to show the interconnectedness of those spheres and how actually they are dependent on each other. And we are claiming that the division, the economics profession in its current form is a synthetic division, because it is only focusing on production and finance and is ignoring reproduction and nature. I already mentioned the care crisis. Over time, women's labor force participation has shown an increasing trend. And this has mainly two reasons behind it. First of all, it is the outcome of increasing gender equality. And the second drive is the economic necessity. To make ends meet in the households, in which no longer a single male breadwinner can sustain, you actually need additional people to bring income. Hence, it's also an economic necessity. So what we see is women's labor force participation is forced to increase, actually. But despite this pressure and changing patterns in paid labor, we see that gender division of labor in the household is persistent. And we see that state policies are ignoring this trend. So the real trade-off is between embarking all the actually weight of reconciliation of paid and unpaid work on women and recognizing or really recognizing it as a socially and politically undesirable thing to do.
Özge, sorry to interrupt you. Just a clarification. Are we talking about Turkey or in general?
For Turkey, this definitely applies. If you're maybe puzzled with increasing labor force participation argument.
Well, that's what President said a couple of weeks ago. But if I remember, the statistics says exactly opposite. But I don't know what. I think you say the exact opposite as well. That's why I think Turkey maybe departs from the rest of the world on that matter. That's my thought, but I'm not quite sure. That's what I just wanted you to clarify if that is the case.
I should say that labor force participation of women in Turkey is also very slowly increasing. When you compare it internationally, it is very low, but it is slowly increasing. And whenever we face a crisis, it actually goes down slightly again. So, but my previous slide applies for the global trend mostly. But also even for Turkey, despite the fact that the numbers are really low, we see that there is a pressure in women's increasing labor force participation. This is actually the modern world that we're living in. This is the pressure that we are facing. However, it is remaining very limited, and we are lagging behind the world because of the lack of policies, especially the care policies by the state. So when we think about the aging population phenomena, in addition to this, population over 65 was 9.3% of the global population in 2020. And it is projected to increase to 16% of total population by 2050. And we know Turkey has been, the demographics of Turkey has been a topic, a popular topic actually, and it is known as, we have a large young population section. However, we are also an aging society, and the aging speed of Turkey is higher than the global average. So currently, maybe the population over 65's share in total population is not so high in Turkey, but it is projected to go beyond the world average by 2050. So there's a demographic change. Our lives are getting longer, but in addition to that, there are additional demographic factors. We see that fertility is decreasing, and people are delaying having children. And so what we see is we are facing a sandwich generation who encounters care needs of their elderly as they continue to care for their children. So they're having their children at a later age, and as those children are still a part of the household, now they also have to start caring about their elderly as well. So this is a generation that we call sandwich generation. And this is also accompanied with other demographic, social, and economic trends that levy a great responsibility on the middle-aged generation. We see that divorce rates are increasing. We see that low fertility rates actually limit the potential of having siblings that could help in this care responsibility. And we also see that maturing children tend to remain dependent for longer periods of time due to rising economic insecurity and low employment prospects. So they're not leaving the household. So we see a multi-generational family structure, and this is not because they want to stay together, but they have to stay together, actually. This term, sandwich generation, is coined by Dorothy Miller to address the pressures faced by baby boom generation in the US when they reached their adulthood in 1980s. This was the challenge appearing in the United States. But today it became a term popular globally as it points to a global trend of today. So, yeah, we have changing demographics, but what about state? What states are doing? When we're looking at the state policy in terms of care policy, it is not possible to think about a welfare state that is gender neutral. On the contrary, the normative assumptions implicit in the policies that are actually addressing some gender roles and social organization of care lie at the heart of modern welfare states. We have two, opposite cases, if you may say. We have caring states in which the idea is state is responsible. And the typical blueprint country examples come from Northern Europe. And then we have familialistic states, which believe that family should be the main provider of care. And Mediterranean and Central European countries are familialistic states. Informal care is the care provided by the family or close people around the elderly. It's a cost-saving strategy for the states. And given the slow growth rates and shrinking tax base, actually the increasing expenditure requirements that is coming with elderly aging population is levied on families. Families are left alone. However, levying this cost on families has costs. It has labor market related costs. It has physical and psychological health related costs for the caregivers. And today we're going to be talking about most labor market related costs. But thanks to our data, we will be able to also very briefly tell you that it also has psychological and physical costs. We are able to also track that as well. Provisioning of care limits labor force participation, affects employment hours and the types of jobs one can take. And also it is not only affecting current employment prospects, but also has implications for future as well. And in some, of course, this all accumulates into differences in wages and income inequalities. And we should also note that, yes, caregivers carry the burden of caregiving and its impacts, but also not having accessible and affordable elderly care services provided also has costs for the care receivers, for the elderly. They are having to stay mostly at home. They're not able to socialize. They don't get quality care and so on. So they're aging, but it is not really a life period that has a lot of quality as well. When we look at the informal elderly care in Turkey, provision of formal elderly care is nearly absent, and family is the main provider. And so we are a Mediterranean model, joint survival strategy. Basically, the state is saying that please bring in your resources as families and just, form 3-generational families, share your resources and time so that you can make ends meet and care for each other. We are not really going to provide the services or the resources to do so. And we also are very familiar with the policy discourse by the authorities who are actually glorifying women as natural caregivers, and they are promoting 3-generational families. We often hear, actually people from the very high rank of the government saying that people in Europe are suffering because the elderly in Europe is suffering because they're not really caring about their, mothers and fathers. And we are so lucky that we have solidarity and so on. In Turkey, what we see is they are leaving the responsibility to the family, but government is also forced to introduce care policies that are primarily to sustain the family in its caring function. So there is some kind of support provided to the family to continue to function as such. And secondly, due to the half-hearted and inconsistent work between EU regulations and its conservative discourse, we see that some things are being done thanks to the funds taken from the Europe and so on. And finally, if I briefly introduce you the literature on Turkey on informal elderly care provisioning, we see that there are studies mostly in health and nursing journals, but not much in economics journals. And we see that the focus is on the caregiver characteristics, caregiving activities, perceived care burden, well-being and life quality of the caregiver, but they're mostly on small samples. In development and feminist economics literature, we see some studies on migrant care labor. And we see some critiques for the cash for care scheme provided by the government for the disabled and the elderly, but it comes with a income threshold condition as well. So our study is, to our knowledge, the first one that is actually addressing a country level data set. That is done with the country level data set. So it's more representative in that respect. And it is attaching this care provision issue to macro issues such as employment, participation in the labor market and employment hours of the caregivers. We're using 2014-2015 data, time use statistics by Turkstat. And in this data set, we have 25,000 individuals and 9,073 households. What they're basically doing is they are recording their daily activities by 10-minute intervals, 24 hours a day. That is what is time use. So in this one, we're able to see any kind of activity, paid or unpaid, together, and who does what, and for how many hours. Luckily, for the first time, the 2014-2015 questionnaire included a specific module on the elderly care, designed to estimate the size and nature of the care needs for the elderly in Turkey, and that is what we've been actually making use of. Our study analyzes the impact of care provision on labor force participation and working hours of women belonging to the sandwich generation. So we are first going to be identifying the sandwich generation. But if you would like more information in terms of what is defined as paid work in this data set, what is defined as unpaid work or care work, and so on, paid work time is including the hours of employment as well as the time that is associated with activities such as travel time and so on. Unpaid work hours correspond to the sum of two main categories, household work and unpaid care work. Household work activities include maintenance, such food preparation, dishwashing, cleaning, laundry, and etc. And care activities include caring for household members, including elderly care, dependent adult household members, childcare, and so on. Yes. So now if we are to define actually...
Sorry, before you move on, is this the last time use survey? 14, 15, it's some years has gone over it. Is there a newer one, or is this the last one carried out?
It is still the last one, Özden. There is a new one coming out soon, though.
Okay. So they are not that frequent, huh? Time use surveys. There are so few and far between for Turkey, I guess.
Yes, yes. There was one for 2006. So they're actually taking like 10 years almost in between to conduct a new one. So there is a new one coming up though, coming out soon. We're looking forward to it, to replicate our studies, and we are trying to also provide some feedback for the time use survey to make it more user-friendly for people like us who are working on care, actually, to make it more informative.
Okay, thanks.
So we are using mean duration figures for time use patterns for women by different age groups so that they inform us about the sandwich generation of women. When we look at here, we see that the longest total workload, paid work time plus unpaid care work and housework, we see that the age group 30 to 49 has the longest hours of work. It is 7.25, 7 hours and 21 minutes, basically, if we add up those two. It is nearly 2 hours higher than the younger cohort and also the older cohort. So we see that this age cohort is the cohort that is working for the longest hours a day. And we see that although this is a prime working age group, these women spend 76% of their total work time on unpaid work. And especially when we also look at, when we compare care house work, how much they spend, they are significantly spending more time on care and housework compared to other age groups. And we also see that this age cohort has less time for sleep and personal care. Also, we see the negative effects in this respect as well. And also, we see that they have less time available to take part in social and entertainment activities, sports, hobbies, and games. So this is the age group that is actually carrying the burden of work and not really enjoying that much. I'd rather maybe briefly say that the prevalence of being a caretaker of the elderly is higher for women compared to men in all age groups. This is what it shows actually, informal caretaker prevalence rates for women and men. We see that women are caregivers more compared to men in all age groups, but the gender gap reaches its peak in the 35-39 age group. And the proportion, the prevalence of not participating in the labor force due to caregiving for children is the highest for this group, 30-49 age group, and part-time work is nearly double of other age groups for this age group. And also, I deleted that slide because it would take too long. But when we divide the age groups by gender and ask them about the reason for working part-time, we see that for this age group, compared to other age groups, people that are saying that they are not working full-time, but they're choosing to work part-time because of their caring responsibilities is higher for this group as well. So they're also actually declaring that this is the reason. And so we kind of, when we looked at the descriptives of our data, it was addressing 30-49 age group. And when we looked at this age group specifically, and for women that are actually providing care for young and the elderly, the sandwich generation, what we see is 68% of the sandwich generation that is providing this dual care is out of the labor force, and the age group's average is 61%. So they are less able to participate in the labor force, and their employment rate is 39%, and their part-time employment is near 24%, nearly double of the age group's average. And our data also reveals that this group is stating that they have the constant feeling of time pressure higher. When we look at the number of people, or the percentage of the proportion of people that is stating this constant feeling of time pressure, it is actually the sandwiched women in this age group. And their health status is relatively worse as well. Our data is also revealing that. Yes. Those are the, actually I already summarized the outcomes of those tables. And, in our estimation, actually I was not the one who contributed with the empirical part of the study. It was my co-author, Emel Memiş, who conducted this analysis. And maybe I just very briefly can show you. In the analysis, there is always this problem of endogeneity when you think about this joint, decision-making processes. If a person is caring because she's out of the labor force, or is it because she is caring that she is out of the labor force and so on. So instrumental variable, using instrumental variables can help overcome that. But in our data set, we only could actually try that with living together instrumental variable and couldn't do, and then we decided to omit that. And employment hours and labor force participation estimation, controlling for other standard individual and household variables have been as follows. And we've been exploring whether there exists an association between providing elderly care on employment by checking the potential influence of providing elderly care on labor force participation of women, yet simultaneously see whether in which direction it is associated with paid work hours in the market. We kind of took advantage of our data set in the sense that it is not a panel, it is not providing us instrumental variables because the data set, the time use data set is not actually focusing on elderly care provision. So it doesn't have variables that are specific to care provision. So we couldn't make use of that. But the advantage of the data set was basically that everything was in hours. We could make use of that. And think about the fact that when somebody, actually we know that the work life has some requirements. You have to be away for work for certain hours. There's regular work hours. So actually it is not amount of hours that you can spend in the labor market, but since it is defined, it is actually determining your ability to participate in the labor force. So we jointly estimated the hours of work and labor force participation together. And we've been controlling for demographic factors as well as care-related factors. And we've been also using additional instrumental variables such as workplace type and employment status as well. And this is the estimation results. But here I'd like to conclude by showing you what we've been finding. We see that there is a statistically significant relation regarding employment hours only for the sandwich generation women. So this provides additional empirical support for our arguments on the labor market outcomes of double care burden of the potentially sandwich generation of women. Our results show that providing elderly care has a statistically significant and negative impact both on women's work time and probability of labor force participation for this age group. But it is negatively affecting labor force participation for all age groups, actually. And the relay that we can see in column 2, 4, and 6. We also observe this consistency for the child care variable as well. However, for the elderly care, we see this impact only for the sandwich generation. And when we were coming across with our result, we saw that actually reciprocity may be the reason for our results, because we see that in the provisioning of care and receiving of care support from the elderly that women are providing care for, there's a reciprocity. When we look at evidence for evidence on the relation between the age groups of elderly cared for and labor force participation of the caregiver, we see support for this argument. Elderly between the ages of 75 and 80 actually affect labor force participation of women positively. But then this positive impact disappears in the further age columns. And also effects of demographic variables used as control variables, household structure and degree of careness of the elderly presented also provide evidence which can be interpreted as indications of same-sex kin-based generational support elaborated in the literature. The degree of need variable is used to describe the intensity of care needs based on the duration of long-term caretaking, ranging from 0 to 5 months, 6 months to 11 months, 1 year, and longer than 1 year. Interacting the degree of care need variable with the presence of a small child with care needs in the household, we find that at least if there is at least one small child, PC is equal to 1, and if the duration of elderly care is for at least a year or longer, the impact on the labor force participation of women is positive. And our findings indicate that as the intergenerational care turns into a continuous relationship, the lives of the caregiver and caretaker become more integrated. Further to this, we also find that living in a household where at least one member receives a pension income positively impacts. Here we can see that positively impacts women's labor force participation. Actually, the impact, it was possible that the impact of pension income on women's labor force participation of daughters could be positive or negative. It may suggest the fact that pension income partly provides income security for the household so that women are not forced to enter into the labor market, or contrarily, it could also suggest that the pension income provides additional income that facilitates affording childcare services, enabling women's labor force participation. The evidence in our study reveals that the positive impact on labor force participation women is present, indicating the common tendency of pooling of time and income resources within the household and increasing interdependency within the families due to increasing care needs and economic insecurity, which is actually documented in the literature. To summarize, maybe, we see that sandwich women's labor force participation is lower and they work less hours. For younger cohorts, elderly care do not affect labor force participation negatively. They receive support from the cared elderly. If the elderly cared for is between 65 to 80 years old, labor force participation of the sandwich women is positively affected. If the household receives pension income, this is also positively affecting labor force participation of sandwich women. However, if the intensity of care need is high or the elderly is older than 80 years old, this reciprocity among the generations of women disappears. Caregiving no longer brings care support for the children and cannot facilitate labor force participation of the sandwich women. So we see that pooling of time and income resources are households' coping strategy, given that they're left by themselves. So the publication of this paper is an open access paper, New Perspectives on Turkey. If you would like to read the whole paper, it is available and it is downloadable from New Perspectives on Turkey website. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask something?
Thank you for a very good presentation. I have some questions as well. Maybe Özden, go ahead.
Mine is very straightforward. In your results, you say that the elderly receiving a pension income has a positive impact on labor force participation. You also have the variable for social assistance. Social assistance does not have the same effect as pension. This seemed a bit interesting to me because it's like incoming money. Why should it not stimulate the same mechanism? Why doesn't it?
Social assistance, yes.
It's insignificant, but the coefficient on pension income is significant. So what's the difference really?
Social assistance is not coming with elderly care provision. It can be any sort of type of social assistance. Maybe that's one reason that we can come up with.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a small amount, or maybe.
Yeah, any
Not
kind of
regular
amount
enough.
is considered as social assistance also. That's also another thing. But when we're thinking about pension income, I think that is a very relevant source of income for households.
Okay.
I would like to add something else on this, the pension income. It's not the pension income. Actually, there was a research done by someone from Bilgi University, sociologist. He examined 100 years trends of these sort of behaviors in Turkey. The behavior is matter there. Obviously, reciprocity is important. I think getting more important nowadays. Maybe about 30, 50 years ago, altruism was more important. But why these sandwich generation were doing this? I think we maybe need to look into the reasoning. Why would they do that? I think one of the important part that you didn't mention, or you have in your paper, or I don't know whether you captured somewhere, but I didn't notice if you captured it. In this reciprocity is not the pension. Moreover, it's actually impact of strategic bequest is very important. Usually the elderly generations leave large bequests those who look after them for their children. Therefore, I didn't see any example or highlighting this issue. In fact, this not the altruism, but sometimes no choice. The kids have to look after their parents, but generally, majority of people have some kind of strategic bequest. Maybe parents basically leave larger bequests to those who look after them. And therefore, reciprocity impact is very important and getting more important. Ben, I didn't see, did you get any data on the impact of the bequest? No.
No, unfortunately, this data source does not have information on that.
But that's an important part of this argument, in fact. Whoever I know, I am one of those member of the sandwich generation. I have kids at home, and I have my mother. We have to look after her as well. In a way, I can understand the first hand, but why the practice thing is the people usually expect some kind of larger bequest from the other brothers or sisters. Yeah, whoever looking after their parents, they have some benefit. So. Maybe they give up on their salaries or wages, but they get, for instance, a house, free house for the rest of their life. Maybe nowadays it's not possible to accumulate the value of a house to purchase, but they inherit a house for just looking after their parents. So that those sort of things are very important. I think maybe I'm not fond of these overlapping generations modeling in this issue, but they capture those sort of models capture these points. The other thing in Turkish elderly, actually in the tax issue you mentioned in your abstract, like shrinking tax bases, it's not quite true in Turkey, this because the tax is mainly regressive in Turkey. Therefore, the largest consumers are elderly people. pay more taxes even sometimes from the working generation even. So not always, but you observe the exact opposite impact on regressive taxes, impact on total taxes. You don't observe always taxes are getting less and less because mainly we pay consumption taxes in Turkey. Who consume more, not only the generation. That part, maybe some leakages you may find there. Apart from that, it was very interesting paper. I enjoyed it. Thank you for presenting. But I think the impact of strategic bequest, maybe you should, obviously this is already published, but maybe for the future things, you may like to look into it.
Actually, I should say that this is interesting. This is an interesting idea, but you really need to have the, data for that. But I will keep this in mind because our next step with my co-author is going to be combining income living conditions survey with time use survey data to see the socioeconomic differences also together. Maybe there we can capture some aspects of what you have brought up, but it wouldn't be, very clear. I wouldn't expect it to be very clear still, but I will keep this in mind, especially if this is a field that is very under-researched. It's a virgin field, and we need actually to generate data on this.
Probably difficult to find actual data for this, but maybe the surveys where the people are looking after inheritance surveys, in labor force surveys, there are some part captured maybe, but I'm not quite sure. I understand it's pretty difficult.
To think about this is, Emel had the earlier data set years ago, and we were talking about these things. Time use and household income surveys, they do not address the same families. So you cannot really bring the codes together and get the demographics and income characteristics of the person who is filling the time use survey. When you don't have that combination, you either have to add items on the time use survey with respect to the family income and otherwise whatever demographics you are interested in, or you just like treat the data sets as separate, then you cannot address some questions as you would like. I don't know, Özge would know better, but that was my experience years ago. Yeah.
Actually, this is something that she proposed and we didn't start working on. So maybe you have looked more into it than I did already.
No. Years ago, Emel had, it was an earlier time use survey, but she knew somebody on the inside and she was able to get access to the codes and try to bring the two together and had some sort of data, but it was not the most recent one. This was much earlier version. Maybe if you know someone on the inside, if you can get access to micro data, maybe you can try, but it is not readily available to everyone. That's all I know about the issue.
Microdata for income and living conditions survey is available.
Yes, but can you match people there?
I think she's going to kind of, I don't know how the matching is going. I don't know actually this is something she proposed and we're going to look into that now. But we didn't really talk about the specifics. But now that Professor Öğr.Üyesi had brought it up, it just rang that bell, that kind of research that she proposed, maybe somehow touch upon, that kind of aspect of this study as well. And we can maybe think about, building up a research that responds to that as well. But I'm not able to, I'm sorry, respond with what she has in mind. We didn't really talk deeply about this yet. Yeah.
Are you planning to replicate this with the new upcoming time use survey?
Yes, yes. And actually, we also would like to, as I said along the presentation, we also would like to give feedback to Turkish Statistics Institute as users of this data set, because it is very hard to come up with actually, the estimation, we are losing a lot of information, I think, in this data set. Because elderly care, when you ask people in 10-minute intervals about what they're doing, they tell you the first thing that, dominates that 10 minutes. But elderly care is not something that you actively do, and that you would declare as the first thing you are doing. Maybe, it is always on the side as the secondary or third activity. So things are very underestimated here, I think. Also the impacts are. So we are hoping to actually provide feedback as users of this data set to make it more informative for us. And yes, we're going to, I think, replicate our studies, but more to that, we would like to actually help them shape it a little bit for our purposes as well. And for, of course, all the researchers who are going to work on this field.
Of course, I mean, like when you have only dummy variables 0, 1, there is only so much you can say. But if you have the actual minutes, hours that are used for elderly care versus some other activity, etc., if you had continuous variables, then your parameters would be better quantified, I think.
The continuous variables are almost impossible, I think, in Turkey. I don't know how.
Yeah, but they wouldn't be accurate. They would be very subjective, but it would still be an improvement on a dummy variable, right?
Yeah, yeah, yes. And also when you look at actually the European surveys, there are surveys specifically designed to address actually this relationship. They have tons of questions on the health status of the care receiver, how much care and the intensity of the care, the characteristics of the care that is provided, because if you go to shopping once in a while for an elderly, that is also care provision, right? But that is not the same thing like living with an elderly and on hourly basis, taking care of an elderly or physically assisting an elderly in every action, every course of action along the day. So there are limitations in this data set, and we hope to actually motivate the Statistics Institute to explore this field more. Yeah, thank you for these wonderful questions, and
thank you for a wonderful presentation. Maybe we should ask our postgraduate students, would they like to ask anything? They are usually a bit shy in these kind of circumstances. Merve, Özge, Aytu, well, Deniz and Onur. No sound from them. Oh, well, Aytu, we can't hear your voice.
Okay, I don't have a question. And thanks for the presentation.
thank you, Aytu.
But very, very good. Thank you.
Thank you for participating.
So who else? Anyone?
They were supposed to have questions, right? Is it
Postgraduates.
Is
Let's
it
make
voluntary? I mean,
absolutely a bit. I don't know this one first, and then maybe for the next one. Okay.
All right, and if okay, if nobody has any further questions, then maybe we should end.
One bad side of these online presentations, we can't go for a drink afterwards now. So well, we just go and get a cup of tea or something instead. Thank you, Özge, again. Well, if you come down to Izmir somehow, we would like to, of course, have you here.
Definitely.
Pleasure.
Thank you. It was very
Certainly.
nice work, very interesting and wonderful to see you. I hope I'll see you sooner. Next time around will be much sooner and not online, hopefully.
Thank you. Certainly, if I come to Izmir, I will try to visit Yaşar University and enjoy your company. It was my pleasure to be part of these talks, and it was a pleasure to meet you. And yes, I'd like to catch up with my old friends after this presentation as well. Thank you.